All right. Hey, Tim, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome, bud.
So, welcome to Pro to CMO, the podcast built for marketers who want more from their careers. And I'm happy to introduce Tim Mahoney, who is the retired CMO of Chevy and Global VP of Marketing for GM. Prior to that, and I probably don't have this in order, but you were the CMO for North America for Volkswagen. Prior to that was
Yeah,
Subaru, and prior to that was Porsche Cars North America. How did I do?
you did perfect. And that's where we met at Porsche probably a quarter century ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. Appreciate your time. Would love to just understand a little bit about your journey, right? Because one of the things I find fascinating about your career
Yeah,
is you've spent X number of years. I won't date you. You spent however
it's
many
okay.
years in automotive. And one of the things I remember you telling me is you're not really a car guy. And so that I think was fascinating. So I'd love to understand just how did you get started in marketing? What initially got you started in marketing for automotive? And what were some of those first career steps that you took?
Sure. No, absolutely. I'm happy to share a little bit about my journey. You're right. I worked with people all my career that were referred to quote unquote as car guys, right? And that wasn't me. We always said if some of those folks got themselves, they would actually bleed motor oil. But that wasn't me. I never really thought about automotive. And it was one of those things that happens, I think, in everyone's career where there's a fork and you go left and you go. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly airplanes. I wanted to work for Pan American, which is now defunct, of course, many years ago. And I was going to go into the Air Force and fly planes. And I went to high school with a guy. His dad was Pan Am's chief pilot, and everything was all set up. And then something happened along the journey, which was I needed glasses. And at the time, you couldn't necessarily go into aviation, certainly with the military, with corrected vision. I wound up in a sales role, and I worked for Sara Lee for just a few years out of graduate school. I was a language major. As an undergrad, I studied in Europe, spoke German really fluently, and a little bit of French. And after 3 years, I decided to go back and pursue an advanced degree. So I went back for my MBA. I wasn't sure when I went into grad school what I wanted to study as an area of concentration. Of course, MBA is kind of a generalist degree anyhow, but I wound up taking a lot of finance courses, and I thought that was the track that I was going to go into. But I had a professor, and it's funny, you meet people along the journey that have quite an impact on your life. And he was a marketing researcher, and it was really interesting to me. And so that was where the road started to change a little bit, and I started to pursue marketing as an area of interest. And my first job out of school was actually in marketing research
And it was market research within automotive.
within automotive. In that 3 year period between undergrad and grad school, I was in a sales role. I was in the food industry, working for a division of Sara Lee. And when I came out of grad school, so I talked, being a guy from Philadelphia, talked to companies like Campbell's Soup. And so I thought about staying in food because people always have to eat. Cars they can postpone. It's not an absolutely necessary purchase. And yes, the answer is I wound up joining this funny little company at the time called Subaru that was incredibly profitable, very entrepreneurial, and almost like a family owned business. And so that was, I don't mind dating myself, that was in about the mid 80s.
But Subaru had a pretty different approach from a marketing perspective than most of the automotive industry back then. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's absolutely fair. It was one of the brands that came to market in the US later than the others, say Toyota or at the time Datsun, but now Nissan or Honda. Subaru came late. And the two entrepreneurs that started the company are really quite characters. It was Malcolm Bricklin, who a lot of people who know automotive know Malcolm's name, and Harvey Lamb. And they went to Japan with the intention of importing motor scooters called Rabbits. And they came home with distribution rights for automobiles. And they didn't really have the resources to develop the entire market, so they partitioned the country into distributorships and sold them off in pieces. At one time, there were about 13 different distributors around the country. So it was a different business model. And essentially, Subaru of America only owned the cars from the time they left the port in Japan until they hit the port here in the US. So it was, they often said Subaru was the bank that sold cars. It was a very interesting business model.
And how did that kind of shape your view on marketing and ultimately competing with bigger players?
Yeah. So I have to say, there's a range of types of companies and brands you can work for. I was most comfortable and felt most at home with, if you will, niche brands. Subaru, Porsche, for sure. I could even argue, even though it's a massive company globally, Volkswagen is a little bit of a niche brand here in the States. That was completely different to my last role as global CMO at Chevrolet. The reason I liked it better was you didn't have the resources, so you had to operate a more smart way, but also it was easy to stay focused. GM, when we had a product that was a small, almost mini car or a small EV like the Chevy Bolt, all the way up to 2.5-ton pickup trucks. That's a huge range of vehicles to actually try and put under one umbrella. But in the case of Subaru, it was easy. Porsche, their old tagline, there is no substitute. It was really about exclusivity and performance and design. So in terms of crafting the brand, it's a lot easier if you have a real clear focus of what that brand stands for.
And so looking back to earlier in your career, is there something you said you were influenced by a professor? Is there something else that you figured out pretty early that helped you be successful? Or something you wish you had known back then that you didn't if you were starting over? What was the ingredient that was missing?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in the automotive space in particular, it's quite normal that you would come into kind of a management training program. Most of the companies have them, even Subaru did at the time. And they like to put people sitting in a series of chairs, and so sort of rotation, if you will. That wasn't particularly interesting to me because that generally led up into kind of a sales management role and eventually into a general management role. And I was more interested really in the marketing side of the equation. So I charted my own path. I joined the company about mid 1984. There was a change in leadership. That's one thing. I think that the shelf life of a CMO, or at the time a VP of marketing, was relatively short, probably still is today. And the guy that hired me really had a tremendous amount of respect for. And essentially within 1 year, he was out. And so they brought in a new guy who was trying to push me into this sort of sales track, calling on dealers, not so much forcing them, but encouraging them to take more products and stuff like that. So it really wasn't interesting to me. So I started to move in a different direction. I took a job after probably about a year and a half in an IT role, really marketing information systems, management information systems, that gave me that experience. I tried to add different things to my background that in some cases pushed me in uncomfortable places. And I was in those roles generally for 2 to 2.5, 3 years. And I think that's really important when you're starting out in your career, to move around, make a few mistakes. And then, of course, as you move further up the organization, your tenure in those roles become a little bit longer. But that was really something that I did. I was in product planning. I came back into research.
I think that's a very big learning. So we're going to come back to that. But you started out as a market researcher, right? And then you switched, you said, to sort of an IT role to learn. Was that right?
Yep.
And it's fascinating because as we do executive search now for senior level marketers, about half of what we do is CMOs.
Yep.
More often than not right now, our clients want a very data-driven, analytical, performance digital marketing background over what we would have seen 10 years ago doing this, which would have been a more brand communications person in that role. So as someone who started with a foundation in market research, which is before the days of digital marketing,
Right.
you had the analytics, you had the numbers, you had the measurement, you had the ability to show ROI from your marketing efforts. Do you think that foundation helped you as part of your career growth?
I think it was incredibly important. The grad school I went to was in Philadelphia, was Drexel, which was an engineering school, but also has a very well-respected business school. And so with, if you will, a soft undergraduate degree in foreign language and international studies, I was always trying to balance back and forth between analytics and data with more the creative and the human side of the things. And so I think having both is incredibly important. What I see now, though, and in some ways I'm glad to be out of it all, is it's a pendulum swing. Right, maybe 10 years ago, they were looking for brand builders and all that stuff. Now everything is all about data. And I think good CMOs have the ability to be ambidextrous and play in both spaces, because you can analyze all day long, but if you can't tell a story and if you can't speak to someone's heart and their emotion, it's for naught. And the data-driven CMO now is certainly the darling of the CFOs and the CEOs because they can point to their charts and graphs and whatever. But at the end of the day, I think there's a little bit going on now where people have forgotten about brand and storytelling and passion that people can have for your product.
And so what's the best way for a CMO? It's a first-time CMO, right? Someone who is starting in their first CMO gig. If you were to give a recommendation on how do we balance that creativity and the brand and the storytelling with that data-driven decision making? Is there a sense you have where if you were back in that situation today,
Yeah,
would you?
it's a great question. I think it's important. This is something that always sticks with me. What my grandmother used to tell me, and she always said, "Your luck in life will be how you treat others." And so, putting a team together that people that have this orientation more towards the marketing science, the marketing data, the marketing analytics, with people that are more creative, allows you, I believe, as a CMO to really play in both spaces. I think we all have preferred styles, comfort zones. Mine obviously is more on the brand side, the storytelling side, but I'm quite comfortable because I've had to push myself more on the analytical side. And so I think to answer your question, what advice would you have is build a good team around you that bring diverse skills and don't surround yourself completely with like-minded people. I think you have to really, because we all have our own blind spots, right? And having that diversity, although that's somewhat of a bad word now, but the diversity in the sense of a broader viewpoint is incredibly important in marketing.
Yeah, diversity of thought, right? And
Yeah,
having
exactly.
people have different backgrounds, different experiences, and bring all that to the table. And it's not everyone thinking along the same lines, as we have seen some examples of how that hasn't worked.
Oh, for sure.
So one of the things I think is really interesting is we worked together when you were at Porsche, and that's where we first met, right?
Yeah.
And we placed someone on your team, and so we had opportunity to interact with him afterwards. And then we did the big RPO project for Cara in Detroit,
Yeah.
which is now Aegis, which was right before you got there.
They had just moved. Exactly.
So long story short, we placed 153 people at Cara, the media agency, which is now Aegis Media, that
Yep.
was supporting the GM account back in 2012. And so we had the opportunity to speak to the gentleman we placed with you. We had the opportunity to speak with leaders at that time as you were coming on board. And I got to say, of all the marketing people that I know, the respect for you as a leader is as high as anyone.
Thanks, Bob.
And what came to me from all those conversations is you had high expectations, right? You were willing to have someone who these people need to do their job and perform at a level that supports the business, be it the employee or the agency. But at the same time, they felt heard, listened to, and like you were going to be incredibly fair with them. Like I literally, I'll tell you the story. I was literally on the phone with one of the leaders at Cara, and I called just to see how things were going, following up
Yep.
on the project. And she's like, "I can't talk to you right now. Tim's literally on his way."
Okay.
It might have been your second meeting ever over there.
Right.
And she says, "I can't talk right now." And then she went on to tell me for 5 minutes how happy they were that you were in that role, how good a job you had done engaging with the organization as the new CMO, and how they really felt a strong sense of responsibility to do things really well, right? Like you had really brought the best out of the agency. So that's a long-winded way to say, talk a little bit about your leadership style, be it internally, employees, what you look for when you're hiring people, coaching, mentoring, or externally with the agency.